Welcome to On the Bobble Podcast, episode 100. I'm your host, Subasa J. Wida, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be doing the first look into the Hunted Classic Constructed metagame. Basically, what we think is going to happen at Memphis and a couple weeks after that, too. But before we talk about that, anything new in Flesh and Blood for you, Yuki?
Nothing too new. I mean, we played pre-release. We're recording on Thursday, January 30th, so I'm about to leave for Memphis in a couple hours, actually. And I've been doing a whole bunch of playtesting in Classic Constructed. I'm locked on a deck for Memphis. I'll be playing Syndra. We'll be talking about it more in the main topic, but I'm pretty excited about this event. I think it seems like, I don't know, release week events are always fun. I like my Syndra deck quite a bit. I think it's good. I think it is not like Syndra decks that I see people playing on Talishar, so I expect people to not really have practice into it. And I'm honestly feeling really good about this event. I like my matchup spread, and I really like how my deck's positioned. So, yeah, pretty excited for the event. And I guess I'll be doing some content on Syndra once I'm back from Memphis. Deck tech, sideboard guide, thoughts about the deck, all of that. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out on Patreon. I guess also a quick Patreon shout out. Thank you to all of our patrons. We couldn't be doing what we're doing without you, so we really appreciate your support. How about you, Jay? How has your week been going so far?
After the pre-release, I got sick, so I've been down for like 2-3 days. But I'm basically better now, so yeah, I basically didn't do anything other than the pre-release. The pre-release itself was really fun. I kind of enjoyed this, and we actually got to do like a draft, 2 rounds of draft, right after the Saturday pre-release because we got enough like prize packs together and put together like a 8-man draft pod, and that was pretty fun too.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was cool drafting with people and seeing people experience the set for the first time. Would you agree? So last week I kind of mentioned that I feel like you can kind of play a lot of heroes in sealed, even though Fang is like the one that you maybe like comes together the most often or is like the easiest to build. Was that sort of your experience at pre-release? Did that seem accurate, or what were your thoughts?
I felt like maybe the Majestics really pushed you into one hero or another,
Mm-hmm.
and like at least like maybe not the Majestics, but at least like the power cards.
Yes.
Some of the rares are just like way more powerful than the commons, so like the more of that you had, like the more you wanted to move into that class. And like for example, my pool had dual threat. I think that's what it's called,
Yeah.
and that card just pushed me into Syndra, and basically every game I played it was like it was night and day how the games went.
Yeah. 0 for 6, very good. I also played with that card in Prague. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah, like having that versus like just a head jab is like you're getting kind of one extra card, and that's just like so much that you can't really ignore it. And this is a format where it was fast, but it did feel like you got to play a lot of turns. So like if you wanted to block, you can block and then like wait for your Majestics. So that's kind of how I played. I kind of like played as many 3 blocks as possible, but basically every game I've lost is when I drew like too many 2 blocks. So maybe I should have played a little bit more 3 blocks if I had the option. I'm not sure if I had the option, but if I had the option, I should have played more 3 blocks.
Yeah, I think that if decks want to defend in this format, they're surprisingly good at doing so, especially with all the D reacts and the powerful equipment running around. So I agree with that. I think that you can play games very fast, but if you want to slow the game down and go second cycle or go to fatigue, that's also possible, especially in draft where the power level on average is a little bit lower. But I think even in sealed, that is true.
I think we'll talk about. I guess next week we'll be doing the how to draft episodes on each of the heroes if we get to do more drafts. I think. Are you gonna be back in Vancouver for next week?
Yeah, I'll be coming back on the Monday. So yeah, we'll jump right into the how to draft series, and then at some point we will come back. So right now is actually episode 100. I think that just with the new set and so much exciting stuff coming out, now is maybe not the time to do we're at episode 100 episode, but we'll do that sometime in the future. So I think we're going to kind of take a rain check on it this time and come back to it maybe during the down season or once we're done our How to Draft series, since that is sort of like important and we want to get that out to people before the end of RTNs, because I know that there are draft RTNs that folks are hoping to prepare for.
Oh yeah, draft RTNs. I need to plan my RTN season too. That's coming up real quick.
Yeah, it is. We pretty much have Memphis and then we're into RTN season like right away. It's yeah, it feels like they've moved it up. I feel like in the past they gave us like maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before we went into RTN season, and now it's like new set RTN season. Do you like that change, or how do you feel about that?
I think I think I'm indifferent. I think the biggest difference would be like access to cards is a little bit harder, mostly for like, the second week of the set release. Like I don't I would want to play Arachne, but I don't know if I can get all the cards from my Arachne deck, mostly cuz I am playing the Schism of Chaos, and I think that's a big addition to the deck, so trying to pick one of those up before the RTN season might be kind of difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I can most likely lend you that unless I also end up playing Arachne with Schism of Chaos. But yeah, no, that's super, super fair. I think that personally I like it, but I also tend to just like order a full playset at release and then not have to worry about it. But I realize that that is not necessarily the way that the majority of people interact with the game. So like the card acquisition part just like isn't part of the equation for me, and I play Flesh and Blood as my main thing, so like the time thing is just like, yay, new set is exciting. But yeah, I do think that there are trade-offs for sure, especially for people who are working jobs and who like in Vancouver or maybe probably some other communities too, like our LGSs stock Flesh and Blood, but they don't have singles. So pretty much anything you want to buy, you have to order online, and then it has to ship. And yeah, it's just like not always the easiest. So I could see if you're in like a hub that has like like your LGS is min max, like the card acquisition part is probably not that big a deal. But yeah, certainly for some communities, it's pretty real problem.
One problem from this set will be Shelter from the Storm. At least like Vancouver, we're gonna be like most of the class cards are not gonna be that much of an issue to find because we're pretty good at like trading and making sure people get the cards they want. But Shelter from the Storm is a different story, right? Because this is a card where almost everyone's gonna need, or if they're playing defense reaction, they're probably gonna want. So I guess, do you want to start by talking about this card, Shelter from the Storm? Do you think this was a good addition from Hunted for CC?
I think so. I've kind of been on like a roller coaster with this card a little bit. When I saw it, I was like, oh wow, another 0 for 4 has a pretty good effect. That seems really strong. And then for a bit, I was like, maybe you just play Fate Foreseen. Like, I haven't really been discarding it like pretty much ever. And Fate Foreseen lets me opt one. This is just like literally a 0 for 4 defense reaction. So like unless I want to go like above the 6, maybe I just play Fate Foreseen. And then recently Shelter has felt very good to me just because of at least on Talishar, Arachne Marionette is really, really popular. Sometimes they're really reliant on flick knives to take their line and mark you, and when you shelter, they get really sad. So it feels like kind of a nice safety valve. I also think that like I've seen some people running like Poison Blade combo Syndra. This is really good against Poison Blade. So it feels kind of like a good D react that you can play everywhere that also is like a bit of a not silver bullet, but like sideboard tech. Like it feels like a tech card for certain matchups that is also just like a 0 for 4 defense reaction. So you're not in like a it's kind of like a Warmongers where you can like fit it into your deck pretty easily to hate out these decks without too much of a cost if you want to, and it gives you some good points in those matchups.
Yeah, I agree. There's been so many times when Shelter from the Storms discarding randomly is like so strong against the just like even a random dagger attack, or like,
Yeah,
oh, you push the Bonds of Agony just by one over and they shelter it, and you're like, my whole turn falls apart. And yeah, it's been a really frustrating card to play against, but definitely I think a good addition to the set. I was gonna say, do you wanna just move on and talk about the most recent ban announcement as well?
yeah. So we got a surprise announcement. It wasn't at the scheduled time. Zephyr Needle was banned. They gave us some kind of like chat messages between devs talking about Zephyr Needle and talking about how, Zephyr Needle and Ira, pretty crazy. I think it's just like pretty clear that when they were designing Zephyr Needle, they have this like push weapon that's a 1 for 2 go again unconditionally. That's downside is it breaks. And then they made this set and they're like, you can buy back your daggers with cards that are just like on rate or above rate in like pick up the point and up sticks and run. So I think that these cards were like pretty clearly just not they're just designed at different times. And like Zephyr Needle wasn't designed to have retrieve as a mechanic.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like a one-time use. If they break it, they don't come back kind of weapon, right?
Yeah, or like maybe you could play it like traditionally I saw some play in Ira where you could use it on the second chain link to have it come in for 3, and if decks aren't playing defense reactions against you because they're super super aggressive, you can kind of like punish them a bit with Zephyr Needle as a sideboard piece, and like it had that kind of application. But yeah, it was very much considered like a one-time thing. We did see some decks kind of abuse this, like Zen in his heyday, not so much now after the bans, but when he had a very high damage output. Zen in at least the aggro matchups was just running Zephyr Needles because he's like, I do so much damage, you don't have time to break my needles, I'm just gonna kill you. Like you break my needles, that means you're blocking and you're just dead. So I think this is a pretty good ban. Zephyr Needle Ira was very quickly becoming the obvious best deck. It was just kind of absurd. You got to threaten Mask repeatedly. You just had like a bunch of like 4 card, like 18 to 20s.
I think the most absurd part about the needle deck was sometimes they wanted you to block with a 3 power on the needle so they can break it and retrieve it and attack again with it. So like you were in this like really weird spot of like, oh, do I use a 3 block and break the needle? Or they're gonna come in for 2 more this turn? Or do I not break this needle and just take the 2, but then, they just don't need to retrieve and they just keep on attacking with the needles every turn?
Yeah. I definitely had some turns where I had like a couple turns where I got attacked by needle 4 times on the same turn because they would like I'd block one, it broke, and then they'd flick one, and then they'd like double. They'd play like up sticks, pick up the point, and like needle me twice again. And I'm just like, what is happening? Like, this doesn't seem reasonable.
Yeah, mostly the first time I played against the deck, I was like trying to like aggressively break the needles and like they kept on coming back and I was like, what's going on? I'm losing.
Yeah, I had this moment of like, surely you can just play like CYB new and gain life and break all their needles and then like play gravekeepings and banish it. And then I draw my gravekeeping and they just like attack me with their needle. I break it, they flick it, they immediately buy it back, attack me with their needle again for like 6 because it was an upsticks. And I'm like, this gravekeeping sure does block too. It's okay, I'll arsenal it next turn. And then they just do like the same thing like 2 more turns in a row and I'm basically dead. It's just like, this doesn't work at all.
Yeah, they don't keep the needle in the graveyard against new.
Yeah. Just like it sounded reasonable. It just wasn't really viable counterplay. I actually saw Brian Gottlieb make a tweet about, he said, there's something about like just play gravekeeping and then it's like a dagger goes through my head or something. It's just like a joke that like gravekeeping doesn't counter it at all because he had said that gravekeeping was a good counter to like CYB in the past. And he's like, just play gravekeeping, but like this time it's just like no, like gravekeeping does not work.
Yeah, I think the only card that worked was Invert Existence, which was a Runeblade card or Shadow Runeblade card, and the only other card was Passover. I think the only 2 cards in the game that like interacted with the needle efficiently was those 2 cards.
Yeah, and most decks were playing Concealed Blade, so they could potentially still just get like, and they had like a needle in the board, so they could potentially get like a 3rd needle. So then you have to banish like 2 needles before it really hurts them.
Yeah, this is why you play triple Invert Existence, whatever the deck was called.
Vincent.
Vincent, yeah. That was the downside. You had to play Vincent.
Vincent might be good now. Call is a hell of a card. We'll see. It felt like she was kind of close, and then she got Call. I'm curious to see where Vincent is. I haven't worked on Vincent at all, so I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's a real deck there.
Fair
Maybe not
enough.
like top tier, but like like A tier. You can bring this to an event. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, like an RTM playable deck. It's gonna win some RTNs for sure now.
I think so. Yeah, I suspect Vincent will pick up a couple wins at least.
Right, then do you wanna move on and talk about the new heroes from Hunted that got added to Classic Constructed and how they fare up in the current meta?
Yeah, let's do that. So I guess let's start with Ira. She's not actually a new hero, but we got her towards the tail end of last set, and she was kind of all the rage with needles for a while on Talishar. She was just absolutely everywhere. We touched on that. The needle ban does hurt her a lot. She kind of loses 2 to 3 value per turn by not being able to swing needles and having to swing Kodachis instead. I think she's still good. She's maybe, I don't know if she's supposed to build like as heavily into the retrieve package as before. I think she was running like 9 up sticks, 6 pick up the points before, and you might not run you might not run 15 copies of retrieve, but up sticks is still a really good card. You can still use flick knives and blood splattered vest. That's still really strong. You still get dual threat. And Ira was like already a pretty good deck. So, well, not a hunted deck. I think Ira got quite a bit of support this set. And despite the BNR, I think she's a good deck. And I think that I don't think she's broken. She doesn't seem like the huge power outlier that she was, but I expect that she will do well and be a deck that we see in top tables, top aids, winning RTNs.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. She was even last format she was kind of good, right? Like she wasn't like winning a lot of events, but like she did show some results at least at like the ProQuest level.
Yeah, and she did like top eight. I don't know. I know Shoma top eighted a couple of events with her. She top eighted some callings. Like she has a pretty decent deck, and I think that with the buffs to her, she's just going to be like probably even better. She's a little bit better at being aggressive, which I think helps her because she can already kind of do the mid range value thing with like you push your CNCs to 7, you have D reacts, and I think you can still do all that stuff. But up sticks and pick up the point and flick gives you some more aggressive lines, which I think will help her in some matchups like Viserai. Before you just couldn't pressure Viserai enough, and haven't played a lot of that matchup now, but I imagine it has to be better because you can just do way more damage.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for something like new too, right? Where you could like just like put more pressure early game, and that's what Ira kind of was lacking, and now she just has that options.
So let's just kind of go through each of the actual hunted heroes. Do you want to start with Arachne Marionette, aka Mario? Which I think is such an awesome nickname for this hero. It's really funny.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part about this Arachne. People call it Mario now. I think in at least in the our Discord, people were saying like, oh, they need to print Luigi and Waluigi and all the all the Mario Bros.
Yeah, it's really entertaining, honestly. So I know that you have played a lot of Assassin in the past, new in particular. I guess you played a lot of new in the past. I know that this is a hero you've been working on at least a little bit, and we've seen quite a bit on Talishar keys as well. What are your thoughts on Arachne Marionette so far?
So I think Arachne is really strong in their hero text. It's the first assassin that got printed with like a power buffing hero text. Mostly it says your attacks with stealth that are attacking a marked hero gets +1, and when this hits, this gets go again. And I think both of the text on this card is very powerful. And unlike Azuri, who like use stealth cards to, like swap into bigger cards, or like New, who really didn't really use that line of text unless it was for like prognosis to get an extra life. Arachne is like the first hero where they kind of punish you for not blocking a stealth card. And it really just like leverages a lot of the aggressive red stealth cards that wasn't really played before. And I think that's a good upgrade for the assassin class. I think like the biggest upgrade would be Kiss of Death. This is a new majestic from the set. It's an assassin action dagger attack. It's the only dagger attack in the game, and it's a red, attacks for 3, and it has stealth. It says when this hits, they lose 1 life. But most importantly, this card pairs really strongly with a new card called Tarantula Toxin. And this card says choose one or both as a 0 cost attack reaction. Target dagger attack gets +3, and target card defending an attack with stealth gets -3 this turn. So if you pair this with a Kiss of Death, this is a 2 card 9 if they block the Kiss of Death.
Don't block Kiss of Death.
Yeah, can you like at this point like are you ever blocking a Kiss of Death?
No. But I mean, I've only really played aggro decks. I'm pretty sure there's decks that just like have to block Kiss of Death, which is why it's sweet. But yeah, as a lot of aggro decks, my tip is just like, don't block this card. Just like don't. Like you can't. Especially because like if I don't know, like they go over, then they codex you, and then they send disruption, and you're just like, oh, I take damage, and I lose my arsenal, or I lose my whole hand. Like it's just like I don't know. You just gotta can't block this card as an aggro deck at least.
So what this basically means is that Kiss of Death against an aggro deck, if you are marked and they play Kiss of Death on you, this is a 0 for 5 go again. Almost every time, no matter what they have. As long as they have a card in arsenal or hand, you can't block this.
Yeah, not to mention you can, because it's a dagger attack, after it gets go again on the next chain link, you can flick knives this, and you also get the on hits on it. So by base, that's the lose a life. There are some people talking about how like this works with spike with blood red or toxicity. I haven't really seen that in practice. I think it's something you can do. I don't know that you really like need to do it though. It's just good on its own, and you kind of don't need to play bad cards to make your good card better. But yeah, this is really strong. So if you flick it, you get that 0 for 5, and then you get 1 and 1. So it's like a 0 for 7 go again, which is crazy, especially for a deck with a bunch of disruption.
Yeah, like assassins only had like 1 0 for 7, which was like the Codex of Frailty, and now we have two. We have Kiss of Death as well. This is like insane upgrade, and that, but it only really works with Arachne Marionette because he's the only one that gives go again inherently to stealth cards.
Yeah, it is much easier to fit into Arachne and much harder into other ones. It also just has a lot of synergy with Flick Knives, which, I mean, I guess Uzuri also has Flick Knives, but yeah, this isn't so exciting in Uzuri. So yeah, I agree with you. Kiss of Death has been, it's a card that looked kind of innocuous. Like you look at it and you're just like, whatever. Then you hear the rules text and you're like, maybe there's something there. And then you see it in play and it's like, holy, this card is so much better than it reads.
Yeah. I think it's the card that's gonna bring together a lot of Arachne decks, and it's probably gonna just be a mandatory 3 ofs, at least from the early looks of Arachne. That's what it looks like. It looks like the one of the most powerful cards from the set.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like kind of what you get for playing Arachne is access to this. Like you don't have some of the disruption, quite as much disruption as New has. Like you don't have Siren's Call, you don't have Mask of Recurring Nightmares, but you just get to do a ton of damage instead, which is pretty good.
I think the one other thing I want to talk about Mario right now would be his weapon choices. So currently, most people are playing double Hunter's
Clave.
Clave. Yeah. So most people are playing double Hunter's Clave, and at least right now, I'm currently testing one Hunter's Clave and one Mark of the Huntsman, and I've been sharing that with the people in the Discord as well. But I think this might be actually a better weapon loadout than double Hunter's Clave, because what I've been finding is that when you play Arachne Marionette, it kind of feels like a downside to flip onto the other side in like not every case, but a lot of cases. You can easily plan your turnout if you are on the base side because it usually gives +1 because you're going to usually be playing a stealth card. And if you flip onto the other side, you have to actually turn a card from your hand into a +3, which is a little bit worse in constructed because every card in your hand should already be worth 3. So like you're kind of losing out on one power when you flip. And I feel like attacking with a Mark of the Huntsman at the end for 2, because if they are marked, it gets +1. And if they don't want to block it, they take the damage and you don't have to mark them, which means you don't have to flip Marionette. Which has been like a play pattern that I've been liking a little bit more than having to have to mark them with the hunters. And Mark and the Clave both work with flick knives exactly the same. So it's basically a second Clave for the flick knives, but you get the extra power from the Mark when you want it to. So I feel like if you are testing out Marionette, I would recommend trying the Marks of the Huntsman at least a couple times. And just don't write it off because it's a token weapon from the set.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't really seen this loadout, but I think what you said makes sense. I think I might be a little higher on the Arachne flips than you have, at least like from sitting across from it. I haven't played Arachne Marionette yet, but I have seen some decks that are like very aggressively trying to mark and flip, and sometimes they use it to pretty good effect, but it might just be a matter of playstyle slash deck construction. So yeah, I'm curious to see like what this kind of playstyle looks like compared to others and where lists run up. But it's definitely something worth keeping in mind, I think.
You know what I think is if they are actively trying to flip, it's most likely a Bonds of Agony turn, and you're gonna lose a lot of life that turn.
That's so true.
It's like it's not like I'm not trying to flip, because if I do find the Bonds of Agony in my arsenal, then I'm gonna actively try and flip because it turns every card into an attack reaction. So it makes turning on Bonds of Agony really easy. So I think it's like you need to be able to do both. You need to have access to being able to flip, and just like having the access to like unflip is kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, the other interaction that I've seen that's been pretty gross is just like the take up the mantle turns are really really nasty. Sometimes you can kind of spot them, and shelter is really good against take up the mantle if you're not already marked. Yeah, just being able to turn a random card into Bonds of Agony. You can often like sometimes they attack you with like a what is the beneath the trapdoor, the blue
Under
zero
the
for one
trapdoor.
under the trapdoor, yeah, the one that becomes a D-react, the blue. They attack you with that, and they've like kept a bunch of cards, and you're like, yeah, you're not attacking me with a blank stealth card for one. Like I see what's going on here, but sometimes it's hard to spot. And the one that I've found really gross that I've had played against me a few times on Talishar is just isolate with it, and then I've seen like isolate mantle nick. It's a Bonds of Agony. Here's 17, and it's just like okay, sure. 17 dominate, yeah, that's sure.
Yeah, 17 dominate and then rip your hand apart. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So some of the stuff Arachne can do is pretty wild. The reach this deck has is crazy. And the way I would describe Arachne compared to New, like your question might be like, why Arachne? I think a lot of people probably understand why Arachne at this point, but I think the big trade-off is like you trade that disruption for the faster clock. And so you don't need to disrupt as fast because like, sometimes you just disrupt them for a few turns, and if they're not blocking, you just kill them. And that's a good way to win a game of Flesh and Blood.
Did you know that if your opponent's at 1 life, every dagger attack's a piece of disruption?
Yeah. Like once they get low enough, your damage is just disruption, which is really really strong.
Yeah. My favorite part about Arachne is the moment your opponent's at 1 and they're marked, every stealth card is +1 for the rest of the game.
Yeah, no, it's so true. How good do you think Arachne is? Let's say like as we're going into RTN season, how where do you expect Arachne to land? Like ballpark, do you think this is like a top deck? Like where does it land? Kind of like tier list wise, let's say.
I think, classify Arachne as like a solid tier 2 deck. I haven't seen a very powerful Arachne deck, at least on Talishar yet, or just like people playing it. There may be someone who's figured out the list, but I feel like this is gonna be like the new, where you kind of need assassins need the format to stabilize before it can actually like do the thing it wants to do. Our assassins in general, I think, are just kind of bad at beating a very wide format, and it's very good at beating a very narrow format. And at least right now, it feels like a little bit wider format with a lot of aggro decks, a lot of mid range decks, and you know, I've seen some people even try up some guardians. I don't know how popular guardians are gonna be, but the wider the format's gonna be, I think the worse Arachne's gonna get. And I feel like week one is typically like a wider format meta game share than it will be like maybe 2 to 3 weeks in the future.
Yeah, I think all of that makes sense. I think I more or less agree with you. I think that in general, it's not really super clear to me. I think it's easy to identify like the tier 1 and 2 decks. I think it's hard to identify which ones are tier 1, which ones are tier 2, and how they all are relative to each other because there's a bunch of decks that are all pretty powerful. And I think it sort of depends like how they adapt and which ones end up on top, and then how those shape the metagame and how the positioning is. But there's a lot of decks that feel kind of similar power level, and exactly which ones are the best is like not super obvious, at least to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the Arachne decks that are really good at punishing the aggro decks are really bad into Enigma, and then the ones that are really good into Enigma are kind of bad into the aggro decks. So like things like that, like the typical new problem is still there for for Arachne as well.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So excited to see what happens to Arachne. I think Arachne is pretty interesting, but yeah, we'll see. Next, we can talk about the deck I'm playing for Memphis. This is Syndra. I've seen community sentiment on Syndra pretty low. I've been poking my head in Talishar games, seeing what people are playing, and people are pretty much universally playing decks that are pitching blues, sometimes with a Poison Blade combo, sometimes just doing value. And my whole thing about the blue pitch decks, not like team blue pitch, but the decks that are pitching blues, is that often it feels like you're kind of doing a lot of work to play Kodachis. You do get to do the flick knives thing, which helps you push Maska momentum and is like pretty cool. But I think that while Kodachis are like a pretty good weapon, when you have to do all this work for them, and sometimes you can like fall off your Kodachis, and then that really punishes you because your deck's built around them, it's just really awkward. And you can play like a whole bunch of flick effects, like maybe you can play like hurls and stuff like that, and what's the other hurl from this set? Throw yourself at them, but like I don't know if that's really like where you want to be in Classic Constructed. Those cards are fine but not great. So yeah, instead of that, I'm playing a deck with 0 blues. It's purely red line. As a result, it plays mostly 0 costs. So you have a whole bunch of head jobs. Many of them are draconic. And you basically are abusing flick knives. So we flick our daggers instead of pitching to swing them. And you can buy them back because you have draconic chain links. And then you're abusing blood splattered vest to play 1 costs. So you can play things like Breaking Point for 0 as essentially like another lava burst that has an on hit. You can play Art of Dragonfire for 0, which becomes 0 for 7, which is really strong. And that's like kind of the basic idea of the deck. And then to supplement the blood splattered vest, you can also use other reducers like Ignite, Drop of Dragon Blood, Rising Resentment, and Art of Dragon Blood. So there's like a whole bunch of cards that reduce the cost of your cards. And I think that it takes some fiddling, but I've gotten the list to a point where I'm pretty happy with it, and it just feels super, super consistent and also very above rate on pretty much any hand size. Like, to give you an example, you can do lines like Brand with Cinderclaw, Flick, Art of Dragonfire with your Blood Splattered Vest. So that's 7 plus 3 plus 1. So you just have like a 2-card 11, and that will work. If you have a fealty, that will work with literally any go again attacks. You can also just do like Rabble in that spot, and that will also work.
Wait, so this means that your Rabble will never miss in this deck?
I'm technically playing 57 reds and 3 yellows, so it is possible that Rabble can be 3, but it's very unlikely.
The 3 yellows so sick, but yeah, okay, that makes sense. Is this the first time we've seen a deck that's like almost all reds? That's like, we've seen like some Ranger plays like a bunch of yellows, but like even like the older Briar deck, the Cheerios Briar deck played some blues, right?
Yeah, I did see a Phi deck running around last format that was running all head jabs. I don't know if I completely believe in that deck. It was better than it sounds, but I don't know if it was quite all there. But yes, this might be one of the most redline decks I've ever seen. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed. I think that it's just very strong, very explosive. You get to threaten Mask of Momentum and use flick knives to kind of like, they block they block one of your chain links. You flick knives so that chain link counts as having hit, and then you get a threatened mask again on the next chain link. So it's really tough to block out, and you also get other on hits like Breaking Point that I mentioned. There's some like mark on hit. There's flick on hit. So there's lots of just like incidental on hits that really add up. And I think that the deck is like hard to block against. And in many cases, decks just can't really block out Mask. There's a lot of decks where I don't think you're supposed to block out Mask, and then Syndra just gets to be 5 int, which is really good.
5 hand size hero sounds really unfair. Mostly at 40 health. Yeah, that sounds really unfair.
Then other things about this deck is it ends up having a lot of reach. By that I mean just like damage that you can't interact with that comes from flick knives, where they just can't really prevent it. Like, yeah, they can shelter, but that's kind of like pretty much it, at least in terms of cards that people are playing right now. And then you also have Art of Dragonfire, which pings for 2. You have like all these breakpoints, which are also just like hard to block. And between it all, it's just, yeah, you kind of like can't afford to get low against this deck. But if you're just blocking against this deck, the deck's kind of happy. So this deck kind of reminds me almost of like red deck wins in Magic, where you just have this like hyper aggro deck that's just like, I'm going to hit you really hard and get you low. And once you're low, like you can't take any more damage because I'm just going to burn you out. And it kind of feels like a similar game plan to me.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you feel about this deck? Do you think do you think this is gonna be like a tier 1 deck, or do you think it's more gonna be like the week 0 surprise you kind of deck?
Yeah, so I think that this deck's pretty strong in the abstract. I expect this to be, I don't know if it's tier 1. Kind of back to what I was saying before, it's hard to identify tier 1 and tier 2, but I think that it is at least tier 2, if not tier 1. It sort of depends how the metagame shapes up. And I think that week 0, going to Memphis, I'm feeling really good about the choice because the deck's just kind of hard to play against, and people are not going to have reps. I think people are going to sideboard wrong into this deck. There's things like you don't really care about frailties at all. You don't really care about erase face that much. I'm not sure if it's correct to sideboard it in. There are hands that get hurt by erase face. There's also hands that just you go like rabble, head jab, lava burst, and it's like, yeah, that erase face didn't do anything, or like sometimes it's worth like 1 value and it's not a huge deal. So it's interesting, and I think that I really like it as a week 0 pick, and I suspect it will probably still be good afterwards, but maybe not quite as strong. Like, I think surprise picks just always get a big edge, especially when they are a little bit tricky.
You know a deck that immediately popped into my mind when you're talking about this deck? Bravo. Man, Bravo sounds so good into this deck.
I suspect that this deck might be pretty reasonable into Bravo, but I could see like Victor giving this deck a hard time, and I think that Jarl is probably a nightmare for this deck with Stalagmite, but hopefully I will just dodge Jarls and not see them. I also don't think you can beat Kano. You just like don't have blues. Maybe you could play Oasis, but I didn't really like bother. I don't know.
Yeah, it seemed playing 2 Oasis or 3 Oasis in this deck seems a little bit like a waste. You probably just want to race it, right?
I don't really think you can. Like, I think Oasis would get you some points into Kano, but I don't know how many people are going to be playing Kano, and I don't know. I'll just play I'll just board for other matchups and hope to dodge Kano and Jarl. I think that that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, I'm pretty high on this deck. I think it's pretty flexible. It can play a long game surprisingly well, where it just sort of like you can board in a bunch of D-reacts and play a longer game and just sort of like chip people down with, you know, like you like against Assassin, I often find it's like I'm playing a 12 turn game. That means I'm going to flick knives you 12 times, and maybe I'll resolve like 2 of my Art of Dragonfires. So that's like 16 damage you can't interact with. And then I have links in the board for Assassin, which is kind of like a lava burst that they're not going to be able to block somewhere. So that's like another 5 damage. So that's like 21 damage. And it's just like, okay, so you're like kind of starting the game at 20. And then I just need to like find ways to chip you for 20 damage throughout the game and not die to you in the meantime. So I don't think it's like free into Assassin. I think the matchup's actually very close, but I've found the plan to be like pretty compelling.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Anything else you want to say about Syndra before we move to Fang?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say about Syndra is there is another Draconic Ninja in Phi. I don't know exactly if Phi or Syndra is better. I think Syndra gets more on hits. I think Phi gets better links turns and kind of like more burst damage. And I think Syndra wins on the consistency front because one of the sweet things about this deck is like where Phi can brick on starters, Syndra can't, um, because your dagger is a starter, and as bad as pitching a red to a dagger sounds, it's usually just translates to like somewhere around like a 4 card 13 or 14, which is still very good. So you can just get that like draconic chain link with go again, and you're like, it's just like, oh, instead of being above rate, I'm like on rate. So I don't know. I've been pretty impressed with the consistency of the deck. It might be the most consistent aggro deck I've seen in this game, actually. I think ever.
Yeah, that's fair. Because like whenever five misses on their starter, it was like kind of a disaster, right? Like their turn becomes like, oh, my deck is filled with 2 blocks. I have no starter. I guess I'm blocking for 8 is like a line that fight takes sometimes. And I guess if you don't have to do that and actually convert to 13 or 14 damage, that sounds like a really good deal.
Yeah, it is possible to brick on chain enders. If you have a hand full of chain enders, your hand is pretty unsalvageable a lot of the time. But all the chain enders block for 3. So there is that. Those bricks are pretty rare. I think like you can I've drawn hands with like 2 or 3 chain enders that still end up working out. So like drawing multiple chain enders isn't always a problem, but like 4 chain enders, like yeah, that is really bad, but that's also pretty low likelihood, and at least they still all block for 3.
Do you still play Snapdragons?
No, I think the new boots are just too good. Flight path.
The defense reaction boots?
No, those are the generic boots. There's new draconic boots, Dragon Scale Flight Path. They are 1 block Battle Warren, and then it costs 3 to activate. You can give a draconic card go again, and if it's a weapon or ally, you can attack with an additional time, and it costs 1 less to activate per draconic chain link you control. So if you have 3 draconic chain links, it's basically like a Snapdragons that only works on draconic, and costs 0, but also has Battle Worn 1. And something that is really, really, really sweet about this card in general, but especially in Syndra, is because it is an instant, you can wait to draw off of Mask of Momentum and then give your attack go again afterwards when you decide if you want to play the card or not.
Oh. Oh, that's actually cool.
Yeah, and you don't have to like give go again and be like, hopefully they don't have the D react. It's just like, okay, they didn't block it out. Now I draw. Now I have full information, and either like, yeah, I do it, or I just pass an arsenal, and that feels really strong.
Oh, okay, that does. I didn't realize that until now. Yeah, that does sound really strong because you get to use Dragon Scaler after reaction step
Yeah, yeah. As long as you use it, you have to use it during.
damage. There's a new step round, right? Like the rules changed for that recently as well.
I think it's damage step.
Yeah, I think there's priority during damage step now, so you can use it during like damage calculation or whatever it's called right now.
Yeah, they just changed it. There's a rules reprise. I should probably refresh myself on that before playing Memphis. But yeah, you use it at the step right after damage is dealt and before go again resolves. Yeah. The other interaction this Boots has that's pretty sweet is when you play Wrath of Retribution, which is the Syndra legendary. If you use it on a dagger, that dagger can swing an additional time, and the daggers cost 0 when you play Wrath of Retribution. So you just get an extra like 2 damage out of the boots, which is pretty good.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty insane.
Yeah, Wrath is just like really good in this deck because you have so many Draconic head jabs. So sometimes you just get to play like 3 Draconic head jabs, Wrath of Retribution for 0, and then attack with 2 daggers for 2. So it's just a 0 for 7 go again. And if you have the boots, it's a 0 for 9 go again. So that card is like really, really insane in the shell.
Yeah, that sounds ridiculous. So Wrath makes the kunais cost 0, right?
Yeah, exactly. So usually you want to like not swing, because I think that's something that's awkward about Wrath is that it gets reduced by chain links. But if you're like swinging, and like you can like swing your kunais and then like blood runs deep to destroy them and then buy them back and then play Wrath of Retribution and swing them, and that turns really sweet. But you need a lot to line up, and you're off your daggers at the end. Whereas this deck gets to play like head jab, head jab, head jab, Wrath, dagger, dagger, boots, dagger, flick a dagger, and then buy back a dagger, and you end on 1 dagger. And this deck is really happy to end with 1 dagger because most turns you're just flicking your dagger, and even if you need a starter, you can just pitch a red to your dagger and have a starter, and then flick it, and then buy back both your daggers, and you're like kind of fine. Going to 0 daggers is sketchy because you don't have your onboard starter, but going down to 1, the difference between 2 and 1 is like basically 0 for any card except for Wrath of Retribution, and that's a 1-up in your deck. So
Okay, yeah. I hope you do really well with this deck. So we can at least get this list out there so people can at least try it out.
yeah, I'll be making content regardless of how it goes, but I'm also hoping that it goes well. I'm pretty high on this deck. I've been really impressed. Everything that I've tried it into so far has felt pretty reasonable, like reasonable to good, like either very close or favored, which is yeah, where you want to be, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like a great spot to be in. Okay, then let's move on and talk about Fang. I think just to start off, the question would be like, do you think Fang's the best warrior now?
I think probably. I think Fang still has the problem that other warriors have, where you just like don't have on hits, but you have the ability to play like very good math, which maybe isn't new to warrior, but you can play very good math on offense. So you don't have the problem of like Hatchet's Story, where it's a great math deck, but like when you need to pressure, you like only kind of can, and if they like block, you lose some value and you might not convert your hand. Like I think Fang is pretty good at converting his hand. He gets so much go again. And when his hero ability is online, he's just like super, super efficient. So I think that you can play like a very aggressive Fang build. I think there's a lot of ways you can build Fang. I think you can play him very mid range. I think you can play him very aggressively, but I think that ability to pivot aggressive makes me. I think Fang's decks are still being figured out, but it makes me more hopeful for the hero.
That makes sense. I think the most common build of Fang right now is like the dual wield warriors. But instead, they're obviously he's playing the double obsidian fire veins. I think I played a couple of games on Fang, and he still has the issue of when you draw the 4 blue hands, it's just like kind of feels bad. But at the same time, you can't really like trim down that many more blues, because if you don't have a blue, his hand kind of feels pretty low impact as well. At least if you don't have the 3 fealties. This has the typical warrior issue of like if Arachne or like New makes like 2 fealty not 2 fealties, sorry, 2 frailty tokens, sometimes the turds fall apart. I feel like Fang has some like big issues of like assassins having like really easy counterplay to it, but other than that, it's just like a really good math stack, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And I like what you said about like balancing the blues and reds. I think there's this really weird tension in Fang where once Fang is online, you can play like a just like mono red Cheerios deck where you play the 0 cost reacts, your daggers swing for free, and even if it's like a 0 for 2 draconic react, it becomes a 0 for 4, and then like maybe the second chain link's like a 0 for 5, and you can play like Blaze Headlong, and you could even play some of the draconic 0 for 4s in there. But the issue is when you don't have Fang online, your daggers still cost 1, and pitching reds to swing your 1 cost dagger is like tough. So you kind of have this spot where like when you don't have your blues at the start of the game, it feels bad, but then your blues once your hero ability is online feel bad. So like maybe there's like some kind of balancing act or there's like some tricks that Fangs are going to figure out to help mitigate this, but I do see that as like that's like the big question mark to me in Fang deck building right now is like how do you balance that or resolve that or mitigate that problem? And I think if somebody can figure that out, I think there's something strong there. But I don't know how like easy or possible that is. I haven't spent enough time on the deck to really have a strong opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. I kind of wish that Warrior got these like power blues like Assassins got. Like, if they had like a prognosis type card, like a power blue, surgical extraction level card at blue, then I don't think we even have this issue. But like the only card Warrior has right now at blue is like Provoke. And that card's good, but it doesn't give power. So it's
Yeah, and it's 1 blue. It's like, okay, we got 1 good blue. Like, what's the rest of them? Like, maybe you can play Glint, but like, they're not that incentivized to block you because you don't have on hits. And when they don't block you, Glint is like real sad. So, yeah, I agree with you. The blues are. And even if you count Glint as a good blue, that's still like 2 blues. Like, what about the rest of them?
I think that's all I have to say about Fang. Do you think he's gonna be like solid tier 2 as well?
Tier 2 or 3, I think it depends on how good, if people are able to figure out those problems in deck building. I think if people are able to find like the right balance, I could see him being a solid tier 2 deck. Current builds feel to me like they're a bit of a step down, but it's early, and I don't think I would have told you this look like when we were looking at the heroes during preview season, but I think Fang may be the hardest to figure out, or like have like some of the most options going on somehow, even though like Marionette is an assassin, and like yes, assassins like get better when you can target the metagame. I feel like a lot of the deck building for Marionette has like already largely been figured out, and there's some like refinement to be done, but like and some like which cards specifically do you want based on the metagame. But I think that like the shape of the deck is like pretty figured out. Like people have a basic idea of what the deck looks like, and it's just a matter of refining that now and figuring out what decks to target with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think Fang is. I think out of all the heroes that came out in this set, Fang does feel like the most fresh out of them because like Warrior's been kind of lacking, and finally Fang is like a warrior that feels a little bit better than all of the other warriors that are currently out. And I guess maybe like exception would be like Dory. Dory feels still kind of great until you play against somebody that knows exactly what all of your cards do. Then it feels awful again. But
Yeah, and she has some bad matchups. Like she's pretty good against the aggro decks, and then not as good against like Enigma most.
or just any deck with like 12 plus defense reactions.
That's so true.
Okay. Anyone else who got cards from the set that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. We kind of touched on Fi. Fi got a lot of new Draconic Ninja cards. Flight Path is potentially very cool, and Fi, you could swing Emberblade twice with it. I think that there is a pretty good Fi deck out there. Where exactly does this Fi deck land? I don't know, but I suspect that he's at least solid tier 2. Do you have any thoughts? Have you played against Fi?
At least when I play my assassin decks, every time I parentify, I lose. So it feels like the Fi decks are just like a lot more consistent, and at least the people
Mm-hmm.
who are playing Fi know what they're doing. And I think Oath of Loyalty is a real card in that deck, and man, they got another starter that decks before, and that feels unfair.
Yeah. I think Oath is really good. I think Ignite is surprisingly good. I think Fi just got a lot of tools. Like I think it's easy to look at this head and be like, oh, it doesn't really matter. But I mean, it's hard to understate how good just like the draconic head jabs are in Fi. And like you said, he got Oath, which is just a 0 for 4 starter that blocks for 3. Yes, it has some conditions attached, but it's very good. Like Fire Tenet is not a starter, but it's kind of just like a 0 for 4 that's pretty unconditional, which is really strong. Not draconic, but very good. And you know, yeah, Ignite's like another starter. Comes in for 2, but you get the resource cost reduction, which I think sometimes can be worth more than a damage depending on your hand.
And do you know a card? Do you know a card that's like not new, but like I forgot about recently, and then now some fives are playing it. It feels gross again. Is Salt the Wound? Salt the Wound is not a fair card, and man, when Fi plays it with the starting with a 0 for 4 go again, it's just like, oh my god, you get Lava Bursted and then you get Salt the Wound. You're just like, like there's a 30 damage turn or something. It's like, how is this fair? Like, I feel like this is like the Zen problem all over again. But obviously, it's not as consistent, so it's a good thing. But like, that's how it feels sometimes with the Mask of Pouncing Links. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Mask of Pouncing Length. I agree. I think it's really strong. And I think that Fi, like, for a while wasn't really in the metagame. And, like, he kind of, like, got to 800 points after winning Worlds. And then just, like, during Rosetto season, he gained 10 points, just kind of disappeared. I think Fi's back. And I think that Fi, I don't know if he's going to Living Legend during RTN season. I don't think that's, like, super likely. He's at 796 points. So, like, 204 points is a lot of wins, but I think he'll LL like this year for sure. I think he's super real, and I think that people are going to play that deck. And I think there's people that just like really like Fi and are going to want to go back to him, and I think that you can do that and feel like you're making a good choice. So yeah, I think that Fi has a lot of potential. The other card I want to talk about that is in my Syndra deck that I suspect is also probably good in Fi is Loyalty Beyond the Grave. This is a draconic 0 for 3 defense reaction. And it says that at the start of your turn, if there's 2 Loyalty Beyond the Graves in your graveyard, you can banish them both, and then you draw a card. Notably, once these are in the graveyard, you can choose when to draw the card. You don't have to draw it immediately after putting 2 in the graveyard. You can just sit there and wait until you have the spot where you want to draw an extra card. And this is like in the longer matchups in Syndra, this just ends up being like it's like a Mask of the Pouncing Lynx. Like you don't get to like tutor for salt, so like maybe it's worse, but you do get to go up a card, and you can potentially use it in combination with Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, so you can potentially draw like 2 cards on your turn. So you can potentially play like a 7 card hand as Vi, which is really, really scary.
Yep, that sounds awful.
So
I think the
yeah.
biggest part about Fi though is that he gets Searing Emberblade and the Phoenix Flame, so like it's just 2
And
more chain
Shuko.
links. Oh, and Shuko, yeah. I think Fi's gonna be a real deck this season.
I think so too. I think Vi is really good.
Okay. I guess let's end the episode with which decks from last season that got worse and which decks got better from this season. Just start with the decks that got worse.
Yeah, so I didn't think I would say this because I feel like last season everybody was talking about MST, but somehow the decks that I have, the first deck I have as a potential loser is Enigma. I thought for sure this deck was going to LL during RTN season. It still could. I think the influx of the new Draconic aggro decks in combination with the meta game shifting pretty aggro towards the end of last season means that I don't know that Enigma is particularly well positioned. That being said, Miragai and Traverse are still really powerful. She still has her like Astro Etching, Spectral Manifestation, Restless Coalescence stuff. Like that deck just does powerful stuff. If Guardian starts to rise up to take on the aggro decks, New is just a nightmare for that. Like there's just like a bunch of decks that still can't beat Enigma. Sorry, I said New, I meant Enigma. So I think that like as much as Enigma probably goes down a little bit because there's just so many predators for her, I think you're still gonna see her, and she's somehow like always relevant. I feel like even when you think she's dead, I feel like Illusionist is like this. Like you had like Prism before. It's like Prism can't beat Runeblade. Prism's so bad, and then it's just like like Prism still just wins events.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that's the illusionist thing, okay? Like illusionist doesn't matter how bad an illusionist is in the format. They just have these like ridiculous power spike turns that like if an aggro deck just stumbles half a turn, they just like I play a mirror guy. It's gonna attack you for 14. I got to protect it. It's gonna attack you for 14, and the game's over. So it's like yeah, I don't. I think Enigma is still gonna be like a solid deck. It just got a little worse because, you know, Draconic set lots of red cards now.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that even though I think she's worse positioned, I think she got some pretty serious upgrades in this set. You might say it's a Draconic set with no Illusionist. What are those upgrades? Well, I think that Flexors is a really good card. It might just be at its best in Enigma, where you have outlets to spend the extra resources.
Sorry, which card is this that you're talking about?
The generic attack defense reaction boots.
Yeah, the quick dodge flexors, right? The legendary generic equipment legs that block for 0, and as a defense reaction, you can pay 1 and it'll block for 2.
Yeah, and you can kind of keep moving it across chain links. So you can turn a blue into a 6 block that defends 3 different chain links. And going wide is traditionally one of the ways you threaten Enigma's board. So I think that having access to the quick dodge flexors is just like really, really powerful. If you already have a Miragai on board, you could even like traverse for another blue to put into quick dodge flexors, which I think is like a pretty powerful interaction. So I think that this is like actually just like a huge upgrade to Enigma, and I think that for a similar reason, Shelter is also really good. Enigma loves defense reactions, and Shelter again stops all the like some like Ira has more tools now, but before, one of the ways that I would try to break up the board would be like Kodachi for one, break my pouncing paws, come in for one, Kodachi for one again, and you're like, oh, I can't deal with all the ones. But like when you have shelter in that spot, it's just it's pretty good.
Yeah, Enigma got some new tools for the new defense reaction and the legendary boots. Then what's the other loser then? I see you have new here.
Yeah, New's a bit of a question mark for me. There are a bunch of assassin cards. I think that they don't super easily slot in. Like I saw some speculation like maybe you can just play like Clave and Flick Knives and then play like Mark of the Black Widow, Mark of the Funnel Web, take up the mantle. I don't know if I think that that package is that great in New. It's possible that like there's like a more comprehensive way to rebuild the deck or other cards you can incorporate. I think there's like definitely options to explore in this set, but overall, I feel like decks are just getting so good at being built with like low blue counts, these hands that don't fall apart to disruption, not having blues that you can steal. And while new is really disruptive and can gain some life, that just doesn't seem as good anymore, especially into these draconic heroes like the Fies that you mentioned. I feel like it's just too much consistent pressure, and you take a head jab from them and they just have three more head jabs, and it's like, my turn doesn't do damage, and even though I'm disrupting you, you still just do more damage than me, and I can't really keep up. So I think that New needs to find a way to get more efficient. And if they can do that, I think New could still be good. But I think the current, like just taking last season New builds and plopping them into this meta, it doesn't feel great. At least not for me.
I think I completely agree with that. Not sure if the mark is worth it. At least no one's proven to me that the mark is worth it. So until someone proves to me that the mark is worth it, I'm not going to. I'm not gonna be trying it too much until I figure out Arachne first.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's possible that there's reasons to play New, but right now Arachne looks like the better. I'm not gonna say the more powerful assassin. I think New's still a powerful deck, but I think the better positioned assassin.
Yeah, well, I think new just still has the upside of, if you've built new last season, it's not going to be that much worse this season. Like it's like the deck is already refined to a point where it's playable, so like it'll be fine. It might be better than playing an unrefined Arachne deck.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's possible. And again, like Enigma, I don't think it's like New's dead, you can't play New. I just think it's not, she's not quite as well positioned as she was.
Then what about some potential winners from last, well, that got upgraded from last format?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about like the heroes that got new cards, like Fi and Ira. So those are like obvious ones. But after that, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I have Guardians. Enigma and New have been the big problems for Guardians. I don't know what's going to happen to their representation, but if Enigma and New are less represented and get suppressed by the aggro decks, Victor looks real good. Victor's really good against ninjas. There's a lot of good ninjas right now. That's just like kind of always been the case. You got to play like Crush of the Week, Spinal Crush. You still have Cast Homes and all your clashes that you're going to win all the time. I think that Victor's probably a nightmare for a lot of these decks. And I mean, I'm telling you how to beat my deck before it's even been played at an event. But if decks are pitching no red or pitching no blues and have 57 reds in them, like my deck, Stalagmite and Frostbites are a real pain. Channel like Frigid is a house, and I think that Jarl is potentially a pretty good counter pick. So I don't know. It's possible that we need Enigma and New to LL, but if they're pushed out of the format enough, I think Guardian could be super real.
hmm It kind of feels like they're not going to be that much Guardian this week, though. Just thinking of
Yeah.
how little representation Guardians had, you know, 2 weeks ago. Like it had almost zero reps at least at the Battle in Toronto. It had like very little Guardians, right?
Yeah, yeah. It is tough. And if you do bring Jarl, I think you can still just lose to Zen, which is a little bit tough. So I'm not totally sure. I don't know if I expect a lot of Guardian at Memphis, but keep an eye on Guardian is what I would say. I think that there may be a window during RTN season. If you notice your locals are dropping New and Enigma, that Guardian could be a really, really good pick. And Certainly, if those deck LL, I think Guardian's back in a big way. But even outside of that, if New and Enigma fall out of the meta enough, I think that you could bring Guardian as like a meta call and seems pretty real.
And I see here you have Riptide on this list as well. What do you think about Riptide?
Same reasoning, pretty much. Good anti-aggro deck. We saw Riptide have like a surge against Zen, actually, way back when Zen was super dominant and pre-ban. I think that maybe a similar Riptide deck could have legs. Frailties are very good right now, I think, in general. For same reasons, I could see Riptide being a thing. The problem I have with Riptide, though, is I feel like Riptide's doing the Guardian thing, but then you can't beat Guardian. So I feel like I'd rather play Guardian than Riptide. But, if you like Riptide, you can also play Riptide and beat up the aggro decks. I think Guardian just might be like a slightly more optimal choice for that kind of like anti-meta deck.
I know there's a lot of Riptide truthers out there though, so the people who are gonna play Riptide is gonna always play Riptide.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I also think that Riptide's like, at least into new, Riptide is like really, really solid. I don't know if that translates to Marionette. Probably. You just have infinite defense reactions, and there you have a bunch of attack reactions. So that seems like it should line up well. I could be wrong. I guess it being on hit go again instead of natural go again is like not ideal for Riptide, but I don't know. I could see Riptide being a pretty reasonable pick. Maybe not as good as Guardian, but I do think Riptide is like, he was kind of like not that playable for a while, like close but not that playable. But he might be kind of playable as an off meta deck now, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
All of this is to say, I think most of the decks that we didn't talk about that were good last meta are probably still good. Like, I don't see any reason that Zen and Vis aren't going to still be good, and probably LL pretty quickly. Aurora is probably good. I suspect that like not all of these aggro decks can be good. Surely like some of them are better and some of them are worse, but it's really hard to tell which ones. And maybe I'm just wrong because I thought that last season and we somehow wound up with a bunch of aggro decks that were all pretty playable. So I don't know. Maybe Flesh and Blood has finally figured out how to design multiple aggro decks and have them all be viable. That would be really cool. But I do sort of suspect that some of these aggro decks are going to rise to the top, and then some of them are going to be like playable, but a little bit less optimal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's everything we wanted to say for this episode, right? I think we talked about basically every deck we wanted to, at least all the new heroes that came in hunted for Classic Constructed. Yeah, do you want to just wrap us up then, Yuki?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a wrap. So thank you all for listening. Hope this was helpful. I guess by the time you listen to this, Calling Memphis is probably either on coverage or finished airing. So it'll be interesting to see how that lines up. And I'd encourage you to check out Calling Memphis's coverage if you are curious about this Classic Constructed meta, because there's going to be just a lot of Classic Constructed games, I think, to take a look at. And I think we have both a Calling and a Battle Hardened, so there should be a lot of data and a lot of maybe some of what we're talking about these tier 1 and tier 2 decks and where they all land might start to come into focus a little bit from this Calling, as we head into RTN seasons week 1 and 2. I think it'll become really, really clear. So yeah, pretty exciting time. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you all next time. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social media. Jay's at Ueda I'm at Yuki Lee Bender. That's over on Twitter. I'm also at Yuki Lee Bender on Blue Sky. And we have an email, onthebobble@gmail.com. If you're interested in our Patreon, it's patreon.com/onthebobble. Have a good one. Good luck playing the hunted, whatever, your RTNs, your callings, whatever events you have coming up. And we'll see you all next week.